sister. They're like, you got to do something.
Okay. All right, hello everybody, and welcome. This is the second installment of the Socially Conscious Artistry Faculty Leadership Series. It's great to see you here in the room, and hello to all you folks who are streaming. Today, we'll hear from the great Arturo O'Farrell, who'll be doing a presentation called Transposing Genres, Fluidity in the Arts. And a heads up that the third and final installment of this series will be coming up on April 17th. Irina Krustelina will be speaking on that event. So it's a great pleasure for me, quite selfishly, anytime I can be in the room with Arturo O'Farrell. Arturo is such an incredible human being, kind and warm, and so smart and driven, and such a beautiful musician. His work is been recognized time and time again for its artistry and its beauty, with 6 Grammys and 9 Grammy nominations and 6 Grammys to his credit. He's one of the most lauded composer, band leader, performers of our time. And so with that, please welcome Arturo O'Farrell.
Thank you, Keller. Actually, it's 8 Grammys, but it's 6 Grammys and then 2 Latin Grammys, which people always, it just happens to us. That's just who we are. But it literally 8 Grammys if you include the Latin Grammys, which I think are as important as the Grammys. In fact, it's very funny because the Latin Grammys actually constitute a much larger audience. It's an international boundary-breaking category. The Latin Grammys involve like 12 countries, and of course the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences in the U.S. involves the U.S. But this is a little bit about what I'm going to talk about. I'm talking about like transcultural. Who am I? Why am I here? Why am I talking to you? I can begin by addressing what very many people have asked me about. In fact, I remember getting a review in a London newspaper saying, Arturo O'Farrell, a stage name if ever I heard one. And so I will address the transcultural part of me immediately. My people, my father's people, come from Longford, Ireland. Strange as it seems, I actually have an Irish American Hall of Fame award. And I tried to explain to them that that's not what the O'Farrells are known for. Nonetheless, they came from Longford, which is in the middle part of the island, and I can understand something about Cuba and Ireland. They're both beautiful, incredibly green, lush places, and they're both islands. So there's something there between Ireland, Cuba, and Manhattan that attracted my father. So he moved, his people moved to Montmartre at first, as a matter of fact. And then they emigrated to a beautiful part of Cuba called Tapaste, San Jose de las Lajas. And then he moved to Vedado, and he surely is that archetype of a modern musician, because his training was in classical music at the University of Havana, plus Juilliard studies with Hal Overton. Felix Guerrero, Hal Overton, and Benny Goodman were his teachers, really. And then, of course, Machito and Dizzy and all that stuff. But so he was really a transcultural person before I even appeared on the scene. And he came to the United States at the age of, I think, 20. First, he came for military academy, because all good Cuban males are sent to the United States for military academy training. He came from a long line of businessmen and first mayors and very important people. I don't know what they traded in. I will say that up front, but it was nefarious. And I think that's important to acknowledge. I think it's important to acknowledge that people did trade in slavery. It's a horrifying thing. And so I feel like in some ways that's part of the work that I do, is to cleanse myself of that part of my background. Nonetheless, he was sent to Riverside Military Academy where he met Harry James. Didn't meet him literally, physically, but started listening to jazz, and that was the infection. He went from being a nice person to being a jazz musician. So he started hanging out. He went to the University of Havana, as I said, but at night he would sneak off to play in the jazz clubs of Havana. And he would show up, of course, he'd leave when everybody was asleep and of course, show up before everybody awoke. And they found out about this. The matriarch, Maria Teresa, called a family conference together and said, Arturito, that was his name. I don't know why my Spanish accents always sound Transylvanian, by the way. Please forgive me. Arturito, is it true? I don't know what to tell you. Is it true you have been sneaking out to play jazz in the nightclubs? Are you going to be a musician? And my father said, yes. She said, the matriarch responded, are you good? And he looked at me in a typical Chico fashion. He looked up at her and right her and said, yes. Absolutely. Went to the United States, met Benny Goodman, recorded Undercurrent Blues, went on to make all kinds of incredible music. But for me, this is a very strange part of my life. When I first was introduced to Chico at the age of 6, I began to really understand who he was as a separate entity. Of course, I was born in the household in Mexico because he went back to Mexico before he came to New York. I think he went to Mexico to ask my mother's parents for her hand in engagement. That's how old-fashioned that was. But I think a lot about Chico, and I think a lot about growing up in that household. And I got to tell you, this is true. A lot of people don't know this, but I rejected all of my Latin identity. Coming to New York, going to the Upper West Side, the only Latinos I knew were the super of my building and the super in my school. So I felt completely bizarre at the age of 6 in New York City being Latino, let alone Mexican, because back then there were no Mexicans, of course. They were all Puerto Rican. And so I rejected a lot of my father's background. I rejected a lot of, because I felt like I was living in an I Love Lucy episode. I really did. My mother is, of course, Lupita O'Farrell, and she was the singer and the artist and the bon vivant of the family. My father was Chico O'Farrell, the Ricky Ricardo of the family. But before we get any further, I need to show you my predatory PowerPoint skills. Do I get a hand or what? But I wanted you to get a peek at what it was like to be me growing up. This is Chico with a piece that I'll take up to the point where the members of the orchestra sing. That's my father. Mexican musician circa 1964. No wonder I'm confused and transcultured. He could always write. For that there's no doubt about. I'm always impressed by the musicality of these musicians from 1964 in Mexico. They're easily the equal of any big band musicians we have here. But again, dismissive of that part of our history. I just want you to hear them say, "Hey Lolita." It's so campy. Now, I'm sorry I had to take you there. But interestingly enough, I had no clue that my father was going to be one of the true pioneers of modern music. I had no idea that he would meet Machito and Mario Basa and compose the Afro-Cuban Jazz Suite for Norman Granz that featured Charlie Parker, Phillips, and Buddy Rich. Had no idea that he was going to get in the good graces of Dizzy Gillespie and record 3 Afro-Cuban moods, Auto Inciense and me. I had no clue who he was. All I knew was that he was my father, and I lived in an I Love Lucy episode. And by that, I mean culturally, it's very weird. Culturally, coming from Cuba and Mexico in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, they didn't read the Spock book on parenting. They had a lot of strangenesses. And what they did, which really flipped me out, is they locked everything. They locked the kitchen. They locked the fridge. They locked the bedroom. They locked the living room. They locked the record collection, which is like the easiest way to get a kid to break into your record collection. At the age of 6, I went to the Manhattan School of Music because, unfortunately, I had a little bit of talent, and all males in Latino households are expected to follow in their father's footsteps. And so I kind of sat there every night. Every Saturday, I went on the 104 bus to 122nd in Claremont and played my Bach, my Mozart, my Beethoven. Eventually, though, I got really curious about the locked record cabinet. And so one night when they weren't home, I fashioned a lock pick out of something, who knows, a bobby pin, a safety pin, who knows. Anyway, I broke into the record collection, and I pulled out the first record I could find, and it was Miles Davis's Greatest Hits. If you've ever seen that record, the cover on the face of that record is unbelievable. It's just Miles looking right at you quizzically. And then I read the liner notes, which were by George Fraser, the styles and fashion editor for Esquire magazine. And the title of the liner notes was The Warlord of the Weegians. And the first sentence is, frankly, I don't give a damn. I can't stand a man who doesn't know how to dress. Then he spends the rest of the liner notes describing Miles's taste in clothing, women, and sports cars. Literally. At the end, he puts in a sentence that says, by the way, I have friends who know that Miles is a trumpet player and that he shows great promise. And I was screwed. I had to listen to this record. So here I am. I'm 12 years old. I'm playing Mozart, Bach, Beethoven, listening to Elton John and Chicago, maybe, not even that hip. I loved King Crimson. That's a part of things that's really missing from a lot of jazz musicians, the King Crimson language, the Uncle Meat variations. You look at jazz musicians and you go, Uncle Meat variations, and they go, they get scared. I don't know why. But anyway, so I put this record on that I just sneaked out of the record library, and I hear Ron Carter come out of my speakers. Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock. And then this crazy-ass melody that seems so simple. I was floored, man. I'm telling you, I can remember this, and I will remember this to the day I die. And I had an opportunity to say these words to George Coleman and Herbie Hancock. I actually had an opportunity to share what happened to me that day. Because what happened that day was a Simpsons episode. The clouds opened up, the sun shone down, and God told me what would make me happy. She did. Of course, Miles. If you're 12 years old and all you know is Elton John and Mozart and Bach, this shit will screw up your mind. It'll completely mesmerize you and change your life. Now, I listened to Miles and I was blown away. I never understood anything could be this effortless and light and beautiful and moving. Then later on, of course, I don't want to talk throughout the whole thing, so I just listened for a second. I'm going to move a little ahead. Well, what I was going to talk about, too, was when I heard Herbie Hancock solo. When I heard Herbie Hancock solo, that was the moment. That was really literally the moment I thought the clouds opened up. And I determined then that I was going to be a jazz musician, that would be the only thing that would make me happy. I'm serious, man. I remember this like it happened yesterday, and I will always remember it till the day I'm no more. But you know, there wasn't a new school for jazz. There wasn't the Manhattan School. There was nothing. There was nothing. The only places that taught jazz were Berkeley, North Texas State, and UMass. Back then, if you wanted to learn jazz, you'd had to go to a club and hang out with old musicians. And so I found a place on Rivington and Eldridge in the Lower East Side called Studio We. And I found myself hanging out every day instead of going to school with Jimmy Vass, Tommy Turrentine, Cornelia Smith, and James Du Bois. And these guys were crusty, man. I'm telling you, there's nothing that you can do to get on their good side. You'd walk up to them and you'd say, hey, how'd you play that chord? And they'd look at you and go get me a nickel bag. Go get me a beer. And then you'd come back after 15 nickel bags or 15 beers, and they would finally deign to share with you the voicing or the particular substitute chord that you were interested in. It was miraculous, though, because everything they had to share with us, sometimes, and I say this as a dedicated jazz educator, the greatest privilege in my life is being able to share what I know with young people. But sometimes I wonder if there isn't that curiosity where you will just do anything to figure out this information for yourself. And I try to instill that in my students. I try to get them to understand that, yes, please. Is that Salim Washington? No, that's not Salim. Sorry. I'm trying to get them to really figure. I tell them, I look at them, I walk into class and I say to them, do not look to me for leadership, guidance, or information, for there shall be none. I want you to learn to ask the right questions. Don't take anything I say seriously. Don't take anything the books say seriously. Evaluate using critical thought for yourself what makes sense in learning this music. And I learned that from James Du Bois at Studio We. Because after a while, after many months of hanging out at Studio We, I was invited to sit in. And of course, they were playing Half Nelson at a really slow, relaxed swing. I mean, that tempo that's like. I mean, you can barely see the movement of the cymbal. And, of course, it's my turn to play. And what do? And up from the back of the room, James yells out, "Stop! Stop! Stop!" And he comes up to me and he goes, "What are you doing, man?" You asked me to sit. Yeah, but we're here to learn. We're here to play jazz. And that was a really important part in my development because I learned the lesson that I think would end up guiding all my social political convictions and the way that I think of myself as an artist. And that is simple axiom: play the room. Don't play yourself. Don't play for you. Play the room. And what I failed to take into consideration was the fact that there were a lot of brilliant older musicians who didn't feel the need to show off. And so I jumped in there and kind of went, okay. So the next thing that happened was I met these guys with a group of friends called the Untouchables. This was the name we gave ourselves. And we just hung out all day playing jazz, going to the studio, and gigging. And I found myself gigging all over the place. I remember gigging one night in up Woodstock, New York, but far off Woodstock, New York, where Carla used to live, which is basically a post office and a bar. That's all that there is in Willow, New York, is a post office and a bar. And we were playing in the bar for beers, ostensibly, I guess, and there was 3 people in the audience, one of whom was Carla Bley. And Carla Bley, by the way, I also want to say this since I have the soapbox, Carla Bley is one of the great geniuses of modern music. I don't know why she's not up in the pantheon with Duke Ellington, except maybe she's a she. But Carla Bley is one of the greatest musical minds I've ever had the privilege of knowing, and I grew up with Chico Farrell. So I want to say that at the outset. But Carla Bley, who I didn't know at the time, was impressed by my playing and invited me to join her band. So I went from playing for beers in Willow, New York, to headlining the Berlin Jazz Festival. It's not a normative experience and something that, but I will say with Carla Bley, I learned the 3 greatest lessons, and I say this a lot. If you hang out with me at all, you hear me say this all the time. I learned the 3 most important ingredients for being a human being first, a musician second, and a composer third. The 3 ingredients that she taught me are curiosity, integrity, accuracy. Those are like the most important things. To this day, I will thank Carla forever for showing me in her actions, not even by her words, but just by watching her do her art, that she was curious about something, she did it. She did it, and she didn't care what the press thought. She didn't care whether the audience liked it. She had the integrity to follow through on her curiosity. And then she had the accuracy, the chops, to do it correctly. A lot of people don't know Carla Bley, but Carla Bley was at one point known as a free jazz musician. And so she was expected to do that all around Europe. And we found ourselves in Italy. And she had just started a relationship with Nick Mason of Pink Floyd. So she was writing a lot of rock and roll songs, and this was her new thing. So we go to Italy, and we're in some festival, and people are screaming for her to do some of what she's known for. And she comes out with some tune called Whirving, which is a song, a rock song. And they start booing. So Carla, this is an example of accuracy, integrity, curiosity, integrity, and accuracy. So Carla decided to get back at the people who were. She wrote a song called Boo to You Too. And I remember it to this day. Just when we were starting to play, someone yelled out, "Take them away." We didn't know just what to do, so we said, "Boo to you too, boo to you too." She would sing this. She would sing this at jazz festivals, man. And then she would actually taunt the audience. They'd boo, and she'd go, "That's the best you can do? Is that the best you got?" This is Carla Bley. This is why she's an American icon, a global icon, because she has this curiosity, this integrity, and this accuracy. Anyway, she invited me to be part of her band, and I'm going to show you a video, but you have to promise not to laugh, because I know what you see here is not what you're going to see in the video. But the other element that I love about Carla, which I've stolen, I steal from the best. I steal from Charles Mingus, Olivier Messiaen, Carla Bley, Chico O'Farrell. I don't care. And the thing that I loved most about Carla was humor. So she wrote a piece called La Leçon de Piano. Do not laugh at my appearance. That band had just some of the most incredible musicians I ever met. A gentleman that I was just speaking to Keller about. Oh, maybe he was in that band. I think that's Bob Stewart. But Earl McIntyre was in that band. D Sharp, Steve Swallow. Some of the most amazing musicians in the world that you could have been exposed to at the age of 19. I found myself on tour with Steve Swallow, D Sharp, Tony DeGrati, Bob Stewart. That's where my Manhattan School of Music chops come through. I'm going to take it up to the point where you can hear Gary Valente. Some of you know who Gary Valente is. If you don't, he's one of the greatest, purest musicians I've ever met. But you know, it's funny. I now could play. I was playing jazz. I was employed playing jazz, and it still felt like strangely unsatisfying. I was not happy. I remember I was drugging a lot, drinking a lot, and just didn't find any joy in doing what I wanted to do. And I said, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me is what's wrong with the world. We'll talk about that later. I just want you to hear Gary Valente for 1 second. It comes up in a while. Let me not do that. Let me not waste your time. Nonetheless, those same friends that I was hanging out with in Willow, New York, that gave me the opportunity to meet Carla Bley, were musicians that also had a spoken word group called, and this is, I'm going to say a disclaimer, if this is offensive to you, I apologize. This was truly the name of the group, and this was 1981. The name of the group was J. Walter Negro and the Loose Joints. And we were one of the first rap groups in the history of New York City. We were on there with Blondie and Run DMC. We were playing the Peppermint Lounge. We were playing the Bond Room. And something happened. I want you to check out the Gary. A picture from my Carla Bley days. See if you can spot me. Do you spot me? I'm the debonair gentleman seated next to Gary Valente in the lower right-hand side of the frame. Anyway, so we found ourselves all of a sudden kind of pop stars. Island Records signed us and invited us to record. And John Hammond, the great impresario, looked at Jay Walter and me and said, "You guys are going to be the next Bob Dylan." If anybody tells you you're going to be the next Bob Dylan, take it with a grain of salt. Take it with a grain of salt. But something happened. There was a summer incident in New York City where a young black boy was killed by the NYPD, who was busy doing something that New York City kids have done for decades. He was shooting the pump, which is the age-old act of taking a monkey wrench and opening up a fire hydrant in the hottest days and then just spritzing everything that walked by, everything that drove by, and themselves getting completely wet in the process. This is sacred New York ritual, shooting the pump. If you haven't ever shot a pump, you haven't ever had a fire hydrant open, or if you've never been wet by a fire hydrant, you just haven't lived in New York. But it was a huge thing for this young man to die in the process. And so we wrote a song about it called Shoot the Pump. And this is old school.
Yo, Mom, can I use a monkey wrench? No, I'm not gonna shoot the pump. I just wanna work on my bicycle for a little bit. Thanks a lot. I'll bring it right back, really. Yo, Lou, I got the wrench, man. You can? All right, man. If you see Lonnie, tell him we're down at the pump, all right? Yo!
If you listen to it,
Yo, Sid, you got money for a night?
it's
Yo, check it out.
spoken
First you
word,
get this up a can, then you empty it out.
really mixed with jazz,
Then you twist and shout.
mixed with instrumentation of jazz, mixed with sophistication of jazz players.
Then you make like a monkey with a monkey wrench, because you feel a little funky, got a thirst to quench.
And it's a great band. Lenny Seeley on guitar.
Then you turn up the pressure, then you turn up the funk. You put the spray in the can, that's how you shoot the
You
pump.
had to have long hair to be in that band, by the way.
Let me see you shoot it, Sydney!
I'll play it up to the point where the police happen to cross paths with the young man who is shooting the pump with a monkey wrench.
Whoa, you got that chick wet all the way across the street, Sydney. Oh, she sure does look fine with her t-shirt wet too, don't she? Yo,
It's a
get that
little
nigga
racy.
bicycle,
It's a
man.
little
Come on,
sexist.
yo, man.
It's 1981.
Yo, Otis, I didn't know it was you. Yo, Cadillac, open window, yo, check it out. First you get yourself a can, then you empty it out. You both ends and you twist
This
and
book,
shout.
by the way,
Oh, you do know how to
made it
twist
into a
and shout.
British
Then you make
book
like a monkey
called
with a monkey
100
wrench.
Bands That Should Have Made It.
You get a thirst to quench. It's like mellow yellow.
It was slated to fail, this band. Too much drug use and too much craziness. And the president of Island Records says, what did you do with the budget? Did you spend it? What budget? And you find out your bandmates have been doing some wrong activities. Here's the part with Shoot the Pump. we know that the age of the cell phone camera has unveiled a very morbid history of this kind of crime happening in the United States. But I didn't know it. And at the moment that we put this record together, and I felt something I hadn't felt as just a musician playing with Carla Bley. I felt a sense of happiness, purpose, solace, contentment. And that began my lifelong journey with dealing with issues of social justice and political activism. It was about that time, maybe a few years later, that I realized that I was going to have to make a living as a musician. And so I had just that's a question students ask every time they can. How do you make a living as a musician? And we have to tell them the truth. So you might not. Sometimes you might not, but you have to be willing to do it. You have to be willing to try. And so I found myself doing all kinds of stuff. I found myself directing the Center for Music Performance at New York University. I found myself being a bicycle messenger, a job which I loved, by the way, until I got hit. Then I didn't love it so much. But there I was, delivering packages, doing whatever I could just to stay alive. And that's a very important part of the process of becoming a musician, because if it's all easy, it doesn't mean anything to you. Musicians sometimes don't understand that, they have to have day gigs. They have to suffer. They have to go through rough times. This is part of the deal. But I got married, had kids, and of course that's another responsibility, and I started doing whatever I could to make a living. Long story short, my father, who had by this time kind of been relegated to he used to do jingles after he wrote the Afro-Cuban Jazz Suite, after he wrote the Afro-Cuban Jazz Suite, after he wrote the Aztec Suite, after he wrote 3 Afro-Cuban Jazz Moods, after his name was inscribed on the pantheon of incredible composers. He could only resort to doing jingles. And of course, he had to do it the right way. He had to do authentic Spanish jingles. They wouldn't have let him do the Anglo jingles. So he was relegated to the Latin jingles, that all the major advertising agencies did. But he was authentic to it. And he actually brought in real Latin musicians. And then I have a copy. No, actually, Rutgers has a copy now of a Kentucky Fried Chicken commercial with Ruben Blades singing the Gordo, the Sonel. It's incredible, but that's the kind of person Chico was. In any case, Todd Barkin, the great producer and impresario, asked me one day, I was playing with Ford Apache, and he asked me what Chico was doing. And I said, he's just kind of sitting and waiting around for the phone to ring. And he said, we can't have that. We have to bring him out of hiding. So he gave him the last 3 records of his career. With Milestones, Ralph Kaffel asked Chico to record 3 albums for Milestone, which was huge. And so at the tail end of his life, he had a miraculous renaissance. And I was there begrudgingly. I took over the band, and then begrudgingly I watched my father age and die. But by that time, Wynton Marsalis asked me if I would create an orchestra for jazz at Lincoln Center. And the first thing I thought was, let me do something a little bit more open than Afro-Cuban jazz. So I created the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra for Jazz Lincoln Center. Let me also tell you a side story quickly. All the years that I'd been growing up in Chico's shadow, I was afraid to compose. I was afraid of being compared favorably or unfavorably to my father. I was a closet composer. I would compose prodigiously and throw these things into a file cabinet, never playing them with anyone. Towards this period of his life, Wynton asked us if we'd play at Alice Tully Hall. And this is a true story, and I say this because I hope it encourages somebody out there. And we're playing, and Chico's quite elderly. He couldn't remember Wynton's name. He started to introduce him. This is one of the greatest trumpet players of all time, and please help me say hello to, and he forgot his name. So we're at Alice Tully Hall, and I'm sitting at the piano going, Wynton Marsalis. And Wynton came out. He's such a lovely man. He came out and just laughed it off. But when I got home that night, I think it was 98, 97, there was a message on my machine from someone saying, Arturo, in a fake British accent, no less. Arturo Mohonduro, which is like the worst thing you can call somebody in Spanish. Arturo Mohonduro, let it be known you don't have a 40th of your father's talent. In fact, I foresee you picking through garbage. Man, I stared at that phone. I realized the house had not caved in around me, that I wasn't instantly, spontaneously on fire, that life hadn't. In fact, I looked at that phone and I saw the thing that I feared most in my life come to pass. And not only was I not destroyed, I was liberated. I was liberated. It was like a tacit permission for me to admit that I was nothing like my father. I didn't listen to the music he listened to. I didn't write like him. I didn't compose like him. I wasn't even into much of the stuff that he loved. And it's okay. It was okay. And from that point on, I started writing. But when I started writing music that had to do with narratives, which a lot of musicians don't do. One of the first pieces I wrote was Such Love in the memory of Sam Furness, who was an alto saxophonist that we loved and died of liver cancer. And all of a sudden, I started using my platform to write about things that mattered to me. I wrote it came to me one day, an entire concept for an album called The Offense of the Drum and a composition called The Offense of the Drum. This was during the ludicrous, lunatic years of the Rudy Giuliani administration. Rudy Giuliani was going around, of course, he was the friend of all the gentrifiers, so this is the first thing that he did was arrest all the drummers. Because the first thing gentrifiers ask is, what can you do about the noise? It's too loud. So people who've lived there for decades are forced to move and forced to not play their music and forced not to play their drums. And some people think it's fine, but I think it's ludicrous. Like shooting the pump, walking around Central Park and hearing drum circles is de rigueur New York. You can't escape it. But here, these drummers are being arrested and their drums confiscated. And so this whole album came to me called The Offense of the Drum. And I wrote a piece called The Offense of the Drum, and it spoke, but it was the first time in my life that I connected social awareness, political activism with my creative practice, and it was amazing. I thought I'd be laughed off the face of the earth. It was my second Grammy. So something else happened that I thought was interesting. If I try to fit into the box they want me to, if I try to put on the poncho and the sombrero and just use that as an excuse to get into the conversation, I have really lost my place. So what I do is I walk in wearing the sombrero and the poncho, but when I sit down, I demand a different conversation. And I've been doing that my whole career. We talk a lot about immigrants these days, and this is one of the pieces that I'm very proud of. It's called Somos Sur, which is composed by a Chilean rapper named Ana Tijoux. I just want to hear, just let you play a little bit of it because to me this is weaponized revolutionary jazz. This is what jazz was created to do, to be revolutionary. This is what jazz was created to do, to raise issues, to change the conversation. And this piece is completely about the people who are shit upon. The immigrants of today. So you see that with the narrative that we're getting from the media. This is Somos Sur. We recorded this, by the way, at the wall between San Isidro and Tijuana. Through the mesh, we performed with musicians on both sides, the United States and Mexico. We used razor wire, attack dogs, customs officers, and automatic weaponry to declare pueblo, to declare unity, to declare peace and community.
Pero las ideas solo puede levantarnos, caminar, recorrer sin el miedo ni retroceder, ver, aprender como esponja, absorber. Nadie sobra, todos saltan, todos suman, todos, para todos, todo. Para nosotros soñamos en grande, que se caiga el imperio. Lo gritamos alto, no queda más remedio. Esto no es utopía, es la rebeldía del baile de los que sobran de la danza tuya y mía. Ya levantarnos para decir ya basta. Ni África ni América Latina se subasta. Con bar, con casco, con la pizza pateada.
My young musicians love this part when they play it. I love intergenerationality. If you look at my band these days, it's great. And this piece is very much about the Southern world, the world that is not in power now, the darker-skinned world, and about how we need to liberate that world and acknowledge it and embrace it. And yes, this is very racy, political discourse. But I think it's an important one to have. It doesn't denigrate or deny whiteness or Europeanness at all. All the music that you hear is coming from Europe. These are European instruments. But in this embrace of what we don't understand, we do away with the lie that jazz is an American invention, and we embrace the idea that jazz is an African legacy, an inheritance from the noble people who were enslaved and terrorized. This is really important to me. And you can't play this music or know this music or teach this music without understanding that. A project that soon followed. Oh, no? Yeah, I did. I'll tell you the story behind this one, too, since we have a little bit of time. This is a good story. I have kind of watched Cornel West for years, and I know some people think he's controversial and blah, blah, blah. But I always enjoyed his discourse. I thought he was a genius. I mean, this is the guy. His hobby is Dostoevsky. He knows more about jazz history than I do. He knows more about my history. And he's just a genius of a man. I mean, you don't forget about what you think. You can't deny that he is a prophet who holds our feet to the fire. And I remember watching him and just falling in love with him. And he came up to me one day when I was playing in Birdland. I thought he was Don King, to be honest with you. But he came up to me, and it was Cornel, and he said, "Hey, man, I love what you do, blah, 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 blah." Now, I'm kind of a revolutionary. I'm kind of an outspoken anarchist, and I do serve on several committees with other revolutionary people. And I was asked to be on the host committee of a conversation, a dialogue on faith in revolution. And it was between Bob Avakian, the president of the Communist Party USA, and Cornel West, outspoken Cornel West. And Cornel spoke that night at the Riverside Church. And I swear I saw colors coming out of his head, just wild swirls of power and color. And I went, oh my God, this isn't just an orator. He's a soloist. And so I determined in myself that I was then going to write a concerto for Cornel West. And I tried to get a hold of him through his publicist, through his assistant. I could not raise him at all. So finally a friend of mine at the Revolutionary Bookstore said, hey, look, he's speaking at a rally. You speak at the rally, and you'll be definitely there to know him. So we got to 14th Street, right here, and spoke at a rally about police brutality. I think it was right after, was it Trayvon? I forget which. It was somebody. And he actually spoke right after me. And again, he electrified people. And so I'm walking with him. We're marching down Broadway or University Place. I forget. And I say, Cornel, I have an idea for something that I'd love to. He says, come tonight. I'm speaking at St. Andrews on 86th and West End. So I go there, and I proceed to hear the most powerful thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, the people in the audience, their hair was blown back and they're shaking. His oratory that night was so powerful, and especially, I think, because he wasn't feeling well. So he was a little like this. But Cornel spoke with such power and eloquence, I could not believe it. And he sat down, and the MC said, and now we'll have a word from Arturo O'Farrell. So I got up and I told the story of 9/11 and telling my children that there were people who would rather make a profit than share the world's resources, and all the things that I still think are true about 9/11. I know it may be controversial. I hope I don't offend anybody. But I lost friends at 9/11. I was there. So I'm just speaking from my heart. In any case, at the end of the little tiny infinitesimally small speech that I gave, Cornel came up to me and said, that was strong, Brother O'Farrell, that was strong. Said, man, Cornel, I want to tell you about a story. I want to write a concerto for you. And he said, oh, come up to the dais and tell me about it. So I went up to the dais, and I told him that he gave me his cell phone number. And I called that cell phone number repeatedly and got no response. So finally I said, you know what, let me not bother this man. I love him. I'm going to leave him one last message. But instead of leaving a message, I did this. Ten seconds later, the phone rang, and Cornell, was that you? Was that you? And we sat down, and I said, yeah. And I said, I told him my story, and he went, and we met and rehearsed. I wrote something. It was I was so proud of it because I caught the nuance. I've studied his speaking forever at the McDowell Colony, and I transcribed a speech that he did and thought he'd do that. Well, yeah, and I did. That was not going to happen. But I had the opportunity to record 4 questions with Cornel West. That's one of the high points of my life. And we were even told by Academy members not to submit this. We were told by Academy members not to submit this, that it wasn't going to see the light of day. That was my 6th Grammy.
What a blessing, what an honor, what a privilege to be here with my dear brother Arturo Afro with the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra. We keep alive a tradition of tremendous nobility and unbelievable royalty. I'm talking about Chico O'Farrill and Dizzy Gillespie.
And I'll never forget, we were commissioned by the Apollo. And to perform this piece with Cornell, at the end of the piece, it's a very powerful hymn, a very powerful old hymn that I orchestrated and he speaks on. I looked at my musicians, and my hardened musicians, and they were weeping. They were weeping. I want to just show you quickly a moment of something I'm also very proud of, just dealing with my people. This is a video we made years ago that I just want to show you. I started an organization called the Afro-Latin Jazz Alliance. After 5 years at jazz at Lincoln Center, we were let go. And I felt bad because I'd taken my people to the center of the jazz world. And Wynton very gentlemanly said, we can't do this. We don't know what we're doing with you. We don't have a business plan. We don't have a strategy. The conditions you work under aren't great. We're just not putting money into it. It's nothing to do with you. I said, Wynton, are we failing the House of Swing? He said, no. You brought much honor to the House of Swing. But I still felt so bad about leaving. And what happened is a friend of mine, Tom Camber, said, why don't you just do what you're doing at Jazz Lincoln Center, but under your own auspices? So I got together a group of advisors, a fledgling group of a board, and I filed for nonprofit status in the state of Delaware, which is the easiest place to file for nonprofit status. And I went to my neighborhood bartender, and I asked him if I could borrow $40,000 to put on a concert season at Symphony Space. I also found the toughest, craziest school, South Shore High in Brooklyn, and asked the principal, do you have music rooms that we can teach in? And I created the Afro-Latin Jazz Alliance with my wife, Allison Susan Dean, on our kitchen table, taping music together for rehearsals and buying cookies and water for rehearsals. Our budget that year was $50,000, and every year we grew. We grew exponentially. But more than growing, we were flooding the city with teaching artists that were going into the neighborhoods that other teaching artists were not being sent into. We were buying instruments for we were buying trumpets, begrudgingly, trombones, saxophones. I'm just kidding. The trombone players in the house, don't, please. We were buying trombones, trumpets, saxophones, percussion, bass. We were giving them to kids to practice on and sending our teaching artists into the school. Every year it grew. At one point, the Ford Foundation called me into their office. You can't apply for a Ford. But Luis Ubiñas, the director, then said, what are you doing? How are you doing what you're doing? How are you even making this happen? I can't tell you. All I know is that the conviction that I had to change the situation for the people of the city of New York was overwhelming me. And so we continued to to do this, and this is one of the things we produced, the Afro Latin Jazz Lines. They came. It's obviously about the migration of the Puerto Rican people to New York, which is quite an incredible achievement considering what's going on. I do want you to hear, though, the first example of reggaeton jazz. Remember, you heard it here first.
Keeping alive tradition from the Congo. Young lords with programs and platforms.
And I want to just say that this is jazz. I'm sorry. This is jazz, weaponized, revolutionary, political, and unafraid. And this is what finally made me find happiness.
Breaking in the Bronx and Park jams. What hurt them about I had the speakers loud. Who you think was there out in the crowd? Ruby D and Disco Wiz, the Charlie Chases and the Whipper Whips. Devastated Tito for the Fearless Four. Crazy Legs, Rocksteady, Tony Touch and more. Brandon K and TKA, freestyle to the
Here it comes, right reggaeton jazz.
They came.
The great DJ Logic.
They came from the island, the flags and the windows in the streets. They reside in Division and Chi-Town, New York City, Massachusetts, Florida, Jersey to Philly, Hawaii to Hartford. Yeah, we all over. Even in a Bombasso in Minnesota. We came back here to Sepa. We know how to party letting off, but whereby we are the rainbow people, no lie. Skin darker than the night, our eyes bluer than the sky. Say things like Dito, Pobrecito, catch us on the corner by the Gucci Frito. Or holidays pouring out cognito.
Again, I love playing this with my intergenerational musicians because you just see the young ones are like, and the old guys are like this. I'm going to skip through all this. This is commission stuff. So, transposing genres, cultural fluidity. So I went and tried to do the right thing and learn jazz and play like Herbie Hancock and found out that that wasn't the deal for me, which is always a lesson for all of us. Don't try to be that which you're not. And in fact, every time I had the opportunity, the platform to compose or speak, I did basically career suicide. Every time. And somehow, instead of not being allowed to speak my mind, not being allowed to share my feelings or my music, I became a Blue Note artist, a commissioned composer. I'm having the premiere of a symphonic ballet in the San Francisco Ballet next week, and my opera was just picked up by the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico. And all of that pales with what really motivates me to be who I am, which is tell the tale. Curiosity, integrity, accuracy. We, all of us, are called to be journalists, to be truth tellers. It doesn't stop wars, but it names the liars. And that's really an important principle. And I don't know what happened along the way. We were invited, the Afro Latin Jazz changed its name to Belongó, and we were invited to be a part of an incredible adventure. The adventure of building affordable housing in Spanish Harlem. And this summer, at the end of this summer, a 19-story affordable housing building is being constructed on 119th Street and Park Avenue. It's called Timbali Terrace. And the first 2 floors of this place are going to be Casa Belongó, the Afro Latin Jazz Alliance Community and Performing Arts Center. All I wanted to do was play like Herbie Hancock. What happened? I don't know. But I do know that I am at peace. I don't know if I believe in happiness anymore, but I've spent my life's energy connecting my heart, my soul, and my music. And that's the best thing that I think I could ever have done with my life. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any question. If you have a question, please scream it out. I'm low on protocol. Please, anybody, questions at all, anything? How much do I make a year? Please. Okay.
I have the privilege or like to share your journey about finding a home for the Afro Latin Jazz Orchestra. And so I know that the Timbale Terrace is pretty much 20 years
2027 it opens.
in the making.
Yeah.
So I just I'm teaching the new school, and I received your email to come and see you. And my question is, can you just share a little bit how you combine arts and politics, and how you were able to finally get the place Timbale and create not only that, but following the business model of all the cultural organizations to build housing on top of it?
I don't even know what the word business model means. If I look at a spreadsheet, my eyes glaze. I am smart in that I know what I don't know. And so I've surrounded myself with I've been blessed to surround myself with brilliant people, a brilliant executive director, brilliant development directors, people who are crazy enough to believe in my schemes and my dreams and willing to support it with their genius and their talent. I feel that same way about the musicians that I work with. They know, what to expect from an Arturo O'Farrell rehearsal, but they show up anyway. And and it's just that's what I would say. The business model is believe. This is the business model. It's a simplistic, stupid statement, but I'll say it. Believe in what you're doing. Don't give up. I would not have foreseen this day in 1,000 years. But I am very proud of the work that my colleagues have achieved. Any other questions? None. Okay, well then you have to hear me play.